The house was too quiet. George Miller, 78 years old, sat at the wooden dining table with two teacups in front of him. One was his, half-finished. The other sat untouched, just as it had for the past 2 years. It belonged to Margaret, his wife, his world, who was gone. The silence pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. For most people, silence was peace. For George, it was grief, wrapped in emptiness. Then came the sound that saved him every morning and every evening, the soft tap-tap of paws across the floor. The German shepherd padded into the room, moving slowly but with dignity. His muzzle was gray with age, his eyes gentle but watchful. He lowered his head onto George's lap, a reminder that George was not entirely alone. George stroked his fur with a trembling hand. "You're all I've got left, boy. Don't leave me too." He looked across the table at the empty chair where Margaret once sat. Sometimes he imagined her laugh, her voice, her presence. But when he blinked, there was only silence, and the German shepherd, watching him with quiet loyalty. That night, George sat in his armchair by the fire. The flames flickered, shadows dancing on the walls. The German shepherd curled at his feet, eyes half closed, as if standing guard over his master's heart. George clutched the dog's collar and whispered, "Margaret said you'd take care of me. And you did, better than anyone ever could." The room was still, except for the beating of George's heart and the steady breathing of his dog. Morning came with its usual ritual. George woke not to an alarm clock, but to the nudge of a cold nose against his hand. The German shepherd stood beside the bed, tail moving slowly, patient as ever. All right, I'm up," George said, forcing a chuckle. His bones ached, but the sight of those familiar eyes softened the pain. In the kitchen, George boiled eggs, one for himself and a piece for the German shepherd. He placed it on a plate, muttering, "Margaret used to say I spoiled you, but she spoiled you first." The dog tilted his head, as though he understood. After breakfast, they walked their usual route. George leaned heavily on his cane, and the German shepherd matched his pace perfectly, never pulling, never rushing. It was as though he sensed George's fragility and adjusted himself to protect him. Neighbors waved. "That's a good dog you've got there, Mr. Miller." George nodded with quiet pride. They didn't know. The German shepherd wasn't just a dog. He was George's last connection to Margaret, his anchor in a lonely world. Back home, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. George didn't speak, and the dog didn't bark. Their silence was their language, their bond stronger than words. At night, George sometimes dreamed of Margaret. She would be in the garden, smiling, while the German shepherd ran circles around her. In the dream she whispered, "When I'm gone, he'll keep you company. Promise me you won't let him feel alone." George always woke with tears, but when he opened his eyes, the German shepherd was still there, watching, waiting, guarding. The garden was alive with the scent of roses. George sat on the wooden bench, the German shepherd stretched at his feet, eyes half closed in the sun. Memories came rushing back. He saw Margaret carrying a tiny German shepherd pup into their living room, floppy-eared and clumsy-pawed. The pup had tumbled straight into George's lap. Margaret laughed. "He chose you, George. Now you can't say no." George had grumbled but melted within seconds. That little pup grew into the faithful companion lying at his feet now. George's mind wandered through years of memories. Birthday parties where children giggled as the German shepherd chased balloons, Christmas mornings when Margaret tied a red ribbon around his neck, summer evenings by the lake. But one memory was darker. The night Margaret died, the hospital room, the beeping machines, George clutching her hand, begging her to stay. And in the corner, the German shepherd sat, whining softly, sensing the inevitable. When Margaret's last breath left her, the dog howled, a sound George would never forget. That night, when George collapsed in grief, it was the German shepherd who pressed close, licking away his tears. Since then, the dog had been more than a pet. He was the piece of Margaret still alive, the echo of her love. George bent down now, stroking him softly. "You're all the memories I've got left." The German shepherd wagged his tail faintly, as if in agreement. It was evening by the fire. George tried to read, but his eyes kept shifting to the German shepherd lying on the rug. Something was wrong. Normally, the dog would have nudged him for their evening walk. Tonight he hadn't moved in hours. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored motions. "Come on, boy," George said softly. "Up we go, just around the block." The German shepherd lifted his head weakly, then laid it back down. Fear gripped George's chest. He moved to the floor, stroking his companion's fur. "Don't scare me like this. Don't you dare leave me tonight." That night, George lay beside the dog on the rug, his hand resting on the dog's chest, feeling each uneven breath. He whispered prayers into the darkness. By dawn, the German shepherd was still alive, but weaker, and George knew in his heart their time was running out. The clinic smelled of antiseptic. George guided the German shepherd inside, his cane clattering on the floor. The dog moved slowly, paws dragging. Dr. Sanders examined him carefully, listening to his chest. Silence hung heavy in the room before the doctor finally spoke. "Mr. Miller, his heart is failing. His organs are shutting down. He's at the end of his journey." George's knees buckled. No, he still eats. He still walks. He still looks at me." The doctor laid a hand on his shoulder. "It's because of your love he's lasted this long. Dogs don't live as long as us, but the love they give is immeasurable." George's eyes blurred with tears. He turned to the German shepherd, who stared back with trusting, loyal eyes. "How long?" George whispered. "Days, maybe weeks," the doctor said softly. "Make him comfortable. Fill his last days with love." George buried his face in his hands. "First Margaret, now him. How do I survive this?" The German shepherd nudged George's hand, licking it weakly, as if reminding him he was still there. Back home, George cooked chicken and rice, the dog's favorite. He placed the bowl on the floor. "Eat, boy, please. You'll get stronger." The German shepherd sniffed, took a few bites, then turned his head away. Instead, he licked George's trembling hand. That night, George laid blankets on the floor so the dog wouldn't have to climb stairs. He stayed beside him, reading old novels, singing softly, telling stories of Margaret. He flipped through photo albums, the German shepherd splashing in the lake, stealing pie, lying by the Christmas tree. George laughed, then broke down in tears. "You've been with me through everything," he whispered. "You can't leave me now." The German shepherd placed his paw on George's arm, comforting him instead. And George realized his dog was holding on, not for himself, but for George. One golden morning, George helped the German shepherd outside into the garden. He spread a blanket on the grass, surrounding them with old photographs. "Remember this?" He chuckled, holding up a picture of the lake. "Margaret nearly drowned yelling at you." The dog wagged his tail faintly. Later, George fed him roast chicken, ignoring the vet's warnings. "One last feast, lad." As the day ended, they watched the sunset together. The sky burned orange and gold. George wrapped an arm around the German shepherd's shoulders. "You always loved sunsets. Margaret did too. Maybe she's watching this one right now." The German shepherd rested his head on George's knee, eyes half closed. George's voice cracked. "If you need to rest, it's okay. You don't have to stay just for me." As the last light faded, George whispered, "Good night, boy." Night fell. George lay on the floor beside the German shepherd, his head cradled in George's lap. The dog's breathing was shallow, fading. "Please don't leave me," George whispered through tears. "You're all I've got left." The German shepherd licked his hand one last time, tail twitching faintly. And then, stillness. George pressed his ear to the dog's chest, desperate for a heartbeat. Nothing. "No, no, please!" George sobbed, clutching the body against him. "Wake up, boy. Please." But the German shepherd was gone. George wept into his fur, the emptiness of the house swallowing his cries. For the second time in his life, his heart had been torn apart. The next morning was unbearable. No paws on the floor, No eager eyes, no presence at George's feet. He made 2 boiled eggs by habit, then broke down when he realized there was no bowl waiting on the floor. The porch was cold and empty. No dog beside him as the sun went down. The neighbors offered sympathy, but George barely heard them. That night, he held the German shepherd's collar to his chest. "You never let me feel alone," he whispered through tears. "But now what do I do?" The fire crackled, the room silent, too silent. Days blurred into weeks. One afternoon, George wandered into the garden. There, in the soft earth by the flower bed, he saw faint paw prints, the German shepherd's paw prints, left from their last walk together. He bent down, tracing them with trembling fingers. Tears fell freely. "They said you were just a dog," George whispered. "But you were my family, my reason, my love." That night, he placed the dog's collar beside Margaret's photo. Side by side, the two rested together, the two souls who had given him everything. Lying down, George whispered into the darkness, "Good night, Margaret. Good night, my German shepherd. Wait for me." The house was silent, but this time the silence was full of love, full of paw prints that would never fade. And though George's heart ached, it also beat with gratitude. For he had known love that was pure, loyal, eternal. The kind of love that never dies,